Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, Only Paying for Job You Do. Many years ago I worked at a cafe, whilst studying in the evenings. I was employed as a dishwasher initially, but after a few weeks they realized I had cooking experience, so started asking me to help out with food prep and basic cooking when the chef wasn't there. Fast forward a few weeks and I'm pretty much cooking or doing prep every shift, and since they had the hourly rates for each position on the wall, I had a look and as a kitchen hand was entitled to about an extra $1.20 an hour. Not a lot, but adds up over the week. So I approached the owner about a pay rise since I was doing more prep and cooking than what the few hours here and there than we talked about, and felt it was only fair that I be paid the rate that coincides with my tasks. He says I was employed as a dishwasher and that's what I'm paid to do. Cue malicious compliance. 2 days later the chef leaves early for an emergency appointment. Since it was a weekday and usually quiet, there was no one else to cook. My boss asks me to prep salad stuff for the sandwiches and keep the hot chips cooking as they have a line out the door waiting on hot chips. My response, sorry, you only pay me to wash dishes and that's what I'm doing. I had the pleasure of watching the owner stumble around the kitchen for the rest of the day trying to keep up and find the stuff he needed. There were a lot of angry customers who got refunds due to the long wait. I think he lost more in that one day than the extra wages he would have paid me for a month on top of my dishwasher wages. I ended up walking out a few weeks later due to being yelled at and abused for refusing to do more than my dishwashing job. The same day 3 other staff walked as well due to bad treatment. Next one is titled, Must Check My Work Email Every Single Day? Okay. So I was working for a small private ambulance company that ended up getting bought out by a larger corporation. To folks that have done this kind of work, no, it wasn't the company you're thinking of, but this new corporation wanted to be just like them. So corporate sends out a directive that all employees must check their work email at least once every 24 hours. No exceptions. Now I'm a lowly part-timer, so it would occasionally be weeks in between my shifts. The fun part is I usually played field supervisor on my shifts I did work. So in order to be in compliance with the corporate directive, I set my work email to update every day at the same time on my phone. I would then log my 15 minutes of email checking on my paycheck, so I would also be in compliance with state and federal payroll laws. I also made sure to inform as many employees to do the same. Didn't check your email while you were on shift because you were too busy trying to figure out what made grandma's ambulance ride to the doctor medically necessary? That's okay. Just check it when you get home. Make sure you put it on your timesheet though. It took a couple pay cycles, but eventually I get a call on my day off asking why I'm logging 1.75 hours on weeks that I didn't even work. I explained that I was just following their corporate directive. I was told at that point that I no longer was able to log those hours. I told them to give me that in writing as that goes against labor laws. Needless to say, the directive to check email every day got revoked. Oh, but I did put down 30 minutes on my timesheet for the call as it took 22 minutes. Next one is titled, You Want Oil in the End Cap? Okay then. The story, during this time, I was about 4 years into my retail job, and I was pretty knowledgeable in my department, as well as our back room inventory. One day, my department manager decided he wanted oil on one of the empty end caps. Normally it wouldn't be a problem, we would have plenty of overstock in our back room. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case, as we were experiencing a shortage due to the department manager dropping the ball in ordering more oil. I tried to explain that we barely had enough for the shelves themselves, but he only replied with, I don't care, I want this end cap full of oil at the end of your shift. He did this with the store manager around. He walked away to go home for the day, and I explained to the store manager of the lack of stock. She replied with, well, that is a predicament, kinda like the predicament that XX department have by ordering too much peanut oil for their department. My only suggestion is just do what your department manager has asked. She had a bit of an evil grin when she said that. That's when the gears inside my head meshed together, and I just replied with okay then. Cue the malicious compliance. I immediately got to work. I went to XX department back room and found 4 pallets of peanut oil. As I'm grabbing 1 pallet of peanut oil, 2 more pallets of it arrived from one of our shipping trucks in receiving. In a matter of an hour and a half, the end cap was full of peanut oil. I had used almost 2 full pallets. The only other thing I had to do was change the price signs. I got done with that. It was the end of my shift, and I went home for the day. The next day, I show up to work, head to my department, and see the department manager standing at the end cap I worked, and he looks upset. "DM, what the hell is this?" Me, "It's peanut oil. You said you wanted oil on this end cap, and didn't specify what kind of oil at the end of my shift, so oil on the end cap we have." "DM, this isn't what I meant. You were supposed to have motor oil on the end cap, not this crap. Consider this your written reprimand." Store manager turns the corner after hearing everything. "SM, I believe OP tried to inform you of the lack in stock of motor oil, and if I recall correctly, you said, and I quote, 'I don't care, I want this end cap full of oil at the end of your shift.' And OP is right, you didn't specify what kind of oil. So I believe it would be in your best interest DM, that I don't see any kind of write-up in the system for this incident. Oh, and OP, the other end caps are looking pretty empty. Could you do me a favor and fill them up with more oil? We received 4 more pallets of it after you left." Me, "Okay then." At the end of the day, the store manager and I had a pretty good laugh, as well as take care of XX department's over order. The only one who walked away with a write-up was the department manager for not ordering more motor oil again. Next one is titled, "My manager makes a big fuss that we are to work from home. WFH, makes us text her every break we have. Okay. My manager likes micromanaging and she used to hate for us to come into work even 1 minute late, literally. We can't leave early. If we are to work a 9 to 5 shift, we literally have to be at work at 9 and only leave when the clock hits 5. Okay. She also makes us tell her when we go on our lunch breaks and when we go to the bathroom." Cut to March 2020. She was given the okay from higher up that we can work from home. You can tell by her hesitancy that she didn't like the idea of that because she would lose her micromanaging ability, but complied because it was outside of her ability to decide whether we can or not. She sent a formal email the night before we were sent home to work that included instructions for us to text her when we were away from the computer. Lunch breaks. Cut to the malicious compliance. I decided to text her when I was going on my break, when I came back and every time I went to the bathroom. Now that means in total, I would send her about at least 5 different texts a day. One day I had an egg casserole that unknowingly went bad. It didn't look or taste off and I was too hungry to care that it was sitting in my fridge for the last 2 weeks. My stomach felt like the fire of 1,000 suns. It felt like I stuck a demonic Furby in there and now it's raising hell inside of me. So I had to poop like 4 to 5 times that day, uncontrollable diarrhea, and texted her each and every single time. She was beat. She texted me back saying I can stop telling her when I use the bathroom. I responded back by saying, "But this was instructed in your email." Same night, she sent another email copying the previous one to update the changes about what we are supposed to do to give notice about stepping away from the computer. Today, we don't have to tell her anymore when we go on breaks, potty breaks, etc. Take that, Susan. By the way, your breath smells like old hot dogs. Next one is titled, "I make all the decisions, keep me informed of everything." Okay, you asked for it. So I work for a large professional services firm. I have a couple of partners above me and the general practice is that they let me get on with the project management and I give them a heads up on what they need to know and do when necessary. One of our partners recently came back from working overseas for a few years and has no clients or work of his own. So me being the nice guy that I am, I bring him along to a few of my client meetings and introduce him as the partner on a number of big jobs I've sold. To be clear, he did nothing to develop the work or sell it, but we need to have a partner to front up any job. So instead of going with the flow, this guy decides he wants full briefing notes from me before every meeting. He wants me to write down scripts for him with what he should say so it looks like he knows what he's talking about and isn't just a waste of space. I'm working 80 hours a week on the jobs I've introduced him into and tell him that I don't have time to write out everything for him, but will brief him on what he needs to know before every important call and tell him what he needs to say. Not only doesn't he thank me for helping him out, but he calls me and starts screaming down the phone to me that I don't communicate enough with him and that he wants full briefing notes before every meeting and copied into every meeting, etc. Also, puts me in my place, that's he's the partner and that he's the one that will make all the client decisions. He also has me in tears on the phone and proceeds to keep telling me what I need to do for him. Fine. Here comes the malicious compliance. Each job probably generates about 40 or 50 emails a day between me, my team and the client. Lots of info being exchanged and the client asking for decisions to be made and calls to be scheduled. I tell my 3 teams to copy him into every email. Every question asked by the client is directed to him to answer in every email. Every little catch-up meeting he is invited to, no matter how trivial or important. Fast forward a week or so. He's got about 500 emails he's not read. His diary is booked out with dozens of meetings. He's got dozens of requests for decisions that have slipped through his fingertips. Every meeting with the client that he dials into, he looks visibly more stressed as he is overwhelmed and can't keep up. He's continually dropping the ball in front of clients and other partners. Other partners are approaching me and asking what the hell is he doing. And he can't say a word to me because everything he needs and every request that was made of him was in one of the 400 emails a week that he is now copied into. Next one is titled, I'm not allowed to ask the senior techs on another line? Okay then. 15 years ago, and fresh out of my course as an electronics technician, I got hired by a local telecom OEM. Nailed their interview exam, because I was fresh out of class and knew the formulas. Go through the in-house soldering certification, and get tossed into production at almost double what minimum wage was. After about a month being taught all the production tests for my products, video on demand boards for head-end equipment at the provider level. 4 video boards, 2 chassis boards. Again, I've been taught how to run the testing and repair the common failures for each. 330 midnight shift, so for most of my shift the product support techs have gone home. Had a few boards that I was having issues fixing, and the senior tech on my line has long since specialized to the chassis side, but he did tell me who could help me with the video boards, on another line that had been on this product for 4 or 5 years. So I'd wander 50 feet away to the other line to discuss the problem. We're talking 5 minutes of doing this on test X, getting Y reading, but the documentation isn't helping. Try these 3 parts. Now, we're putting out 150 boards in 8 hours, and I'd start my shift with 30 or 40 boards that failed a production test and have been put on the repair shelf. I got really good at fixing 4 or 5 issues, and day shift wouldn't even try to fix those ones because I'd got it down to a science after 3 or 4 months. On average, I'd have to ask a senior tech for advice once or twice a shift. About 6 months in, my line manager wanted to ask me something and I was on the other line. She flipped, insisted I stay at my repair station and not bother the other techs. Deal. I'll work on the boards that I can fix easily. Cue malicious compliance. After about 2 weeks my productivity had dropped from 50 boards to about 35 to 40 a shift, because I was only doing the boards for those 4 or 5 issues I could fix blindfolded. One was literally poking on 3 capacitors and watching the output to see which was bad. 4 boxes instead of 5, and I'd now waste an hour or so reading the documentation without fixing boards. And the days that I just spent programming boards and sending away to swap a chip were more like 20 repaired. After a month of not asking for advice, my productivity was down to half, but all my work and time was well documented in the system, including the days I'd work on one board all shift. When she got her metrics for the month, I was pulled aside and quietly told I could ask the senior techs for advice again. I transferred from production into warranty after a year, and created the documentation for a new product we bought for wireless data. 5 test failures, 8 possible parts, and repairing pallets of 300 units a week myself, including swapping chips, that I wasn't allowed to do in production. When I left there after 4.5 years, I had been promoted twice more and was giving directions to that production manager's direct boss. Next one is titled, Lunch and Learn. I once had a sales manager that the entire team abhorred. Imagine if you took Opie from the Andy Griffith Show and merged him with a dildo. That person was my boss. His personality I would describe as a freeze-dried turd. He also referred to charity work we did as a company as fluff. In case you haven't picked up on it, I hated him. So thanks to Texas laws, you couldn't force anyone to work overtime without pay. Guess what this douche nozzle wanted to do? Lunch and learns. He would have the team head to a conference room and do a training during lunch. He would buy one large pizza for 8 adults. We did a couple of them begrudgingly, and didn't say anything about the additional work hours. We were all sales, so the hourly wasn't a big deal. That being said, this garbage can of a boss started nitpicking on our time, like when we got there in the morning and when we left. I was almost always the first one to arrive in the mornings, but I had been late one week because of traffic. His response: "Make sure you input that you were late on your timesheet." I said of course. I then made sure to record my time that week spent training on lunch break. That ended with me having 30 minutes of overtime and an inquiry to my boss from his leadership as to why someone had overtime. Just like that. No more lunch and learns. If any of my old teammates read this, you're welcome. He hated my guts from then on and made my life hell. Worth it. Next one is titled, "Won't let me delay my speech because I'm ill, no problem." Another post reminded me of this story, and to this day I still regret not reporting my professor for this. A few years ago, in my second year of college, I took a speech class that was required to graduate. Before this incident, I had no problems with the professor. I had the highest grade in the class and all my conversations with her had been pleasant. Then Thanksgiving break happens. I leave to go home for the week, and come down with a nasty illness. I was later diagnosed with a sinus infection, an ear infection, and bronchitis all at the same time. Don't want to give details, but it was bad. Knowing that I had to give my final speech for this class on the Tuesday after break, I emailed my professor explaining just how ill I was and asked if I could give my speech on Thursday instead of Tuesday. Half the class was going on Tuesday, the other on Thursday, so I figured that this wouldn't be a problem. The professor emails back and says that I have two options: show up to class sick on Tuesday and give my speech as I am, or go to the doctor on Tuesday, get a doctor's note, then do my speech on Thursday. But, if I did this option, my grade would be deducted for missing class, as well as she would give me a maximum of AB for my speech instead of an A. Based on the language of her email, she clearly expected me to go to the doctor and miss class, dropping my grade. Cue the malicious compliance. Tuesday rolls around, and I show up to class in my full business attire, but with the addition of tissues, cough drops, and a plastic bag. I get up to give my speech, and my illness is in full swing. I could tell that she looked disgusted, and at this point clearly regretted telling me that I had to come to class. She very clearly did not think I was as sick as I was and thought that I was just looking to BS her to get an extension. This professor was certainly proved wrong that day. After class gets out, I finally go to the doctor, learn that I have the trifecta: sinus infection, ear infection, and bronchitis, get scolded by the doctor for going to class the day before, and get told not to attend class for the rest of the week. Professor ended up giving me an A on the assignment, and never gave me any trouble about late assignments because of my illness for the rest of the semester. Last one is titled, "Son Learns a Lesson About Lying." Many moons ago, when my son was about 5 years old, he discovered the art of lying. He wasn't doing it for gain, it was more like he suddenly discovered he could trick people with just the power of his words. This became his default mode, which was annoying but bearable. Until the day he told his teacher that his older brother had died. He hadn't, he was just off sick that day. I turn up at school to pick him up that afternoon to find people in tears and me totally confused about what was going on. Anyway, enough was enough. I told my son that I expected him to tell me the truth, and from that moment on I was going to assume that everything he told me was true. Cue malicious compliance. A few days later I was handing out pocket money, and he told me his dad has already given it to him. He hadn't. Of course, a few hours later he comes looking for it again for real, and I'm like, "But you told me your dad had already given it to you, and I believe you." No pocket money for him that week, and he was not happy about it. The next day my son told me he had already eaten breakfast, a stupid and easily disprovable story considering I was the one who usually made it every morning. So he was sent off to school hungry. When he asked me to stop at the shop on the way to school for something to eat, I made sure to point out that I believed with all my heart that he had already eaten that morning, because he told me so, and I would be a poor mother if I overfed him. The final straw came for him on the day he had swim class at school. The usual process was that the kids would turn up to school with their swimwear already on under their school uniform. I asked him well before we left if he had his bathers on under his uniform, and he said yes. However, later as we are getting in the car to drive to school, he suddenly tells me that he really doesn't have his bathers on. My response: "Of course you do, because you told me so, and you always tell the truth." I then proceeded to take him to school. This was a big deal for him because it meant that he would now have to strip off and get changed in front of the other kids before the swim class, and he was quite sensitive about that sort of thing. He screamed and cried and begged the whole way to school, but I was relentless. I held firm, even when the teacher rang me later to say that he was distraught, and could I come and pick him up. I made him stay the whole day. I felt terrible, but it had to be done, and when I explained, his teacher understood why. I think she still has PTSD about the whole dead brother episode. He was dark on me for weeks after that, but it stopped the lying dead in its tracks. Never had to play that card again, so I considered it a win. Thanks for listening.